Okay, I'm bringing back to say a few words to us, Attorney Deborah Hrbek.
Good afternoon, everyone. How wonderful to see so many of you gathered here at the UK consulate to support Julian Assange. This is one of the most important cases of our lifetime. As we speak, the opening statements are underway in Julian's extradition case in London. The extradition hearing will happen in May. The next several weeks are vital. Voices from the American public in opposition to extradition need to be heard loud and clear across the Atlantic. The WikiLeaks disclosures are the subject of the indictment against Assange, and they were a matter of public interest. If we don't show that we care about defending our democratic right to know what the US government is doing in our name, how can we expect a judge in England to care? Today, during the first day of opening statements, the US government presented its case for extraditing Julian Assange on an 18-count indictment that could land him in prison for 175 years. 17 of the 18 counts are under the Espionage Act, which has no public interest defense. If successful, this case will criminalize routine investigative journalism activities on the part of both journalists and publishers. Why the Espionage Act? The Espionage Act dates back to 1917. It was enacted during the First World War to deal with spies and saboteurs. Reporting on and publishing acts of the government, even embarrassing acts or war crimes, is not spying. It is not treason. It's investigative journalism. Never before has the Espionage Act been used to punish or prosecute journalists or publishers in this way. This is a grave misuse of the statute, and it sets dangerous precedents for any journalist or publication anywhere in the world who dares to report on or publish information that the US government decides is harmful to its interests. The Trump administration, in its ongoing vendetta against the media, is criminalizing investigative journalism. This is the kind of activity that goes to the core of our democracy, government accountability. President Obama was no fan of WikiLeaks, no fan of Julian Assange, no fan of leakers of government secrets, but he commuted the sentence of Chelsea Manning, the actual leaker, after only 7 years. And his Justice Department refused to prosecute Julian Assange or WikiLeaks. Obama understood that such a prosecution would present a New York Times problem. You couldn't indict WikiLeaks without also going after the New York Times or the Washington Post, who published the same material based on the same source. This does not concern the Trump administration. This is exactly what it wants: an excuse to criminalize the routine activities of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and any other journalist or publisher who is anything other than fawning. As we watch the Trump administration dismantle every vestige of checks and balances provided by the Constitution, we must stand strong and do everything we can to prevent him from tearing down the most important check on government overreach: the fourth estate, the press. We have seen over the past 3 years just how fragile our democracy is. A core part of democracy is government accountability. In a democracy, the public has a right to know what its government is doing. It is the job of journalists to find out what the government is doing and inform the public about it, exposing things that the government would prefer us not to know. How can we decide who we want to vote for if we don't even have a window to see what our politicians are doing when they are in office? Without government accountability and a free press, we have no democracy. The first act of any despot is to trample free speech and quash press freedoms and stamp out criticism. By demonizing this individual, Julian Assange, the government is trying to get one over on us. Julian's not a journalist, they say. WikiLeaks is not a publisher, they say. Okay, we say, and bam. Because whether or not you consider Julian to be a journalist or WikiLeaks to be a publisher, the activities described in the indictment against Assange are the routine activities of investigative journalism. If successful, it will set a precedent that will decimate press freedom. You can hate Julian Assange and WikiLeaks for releasing DNC and Podesta emails in 2016 that may or may not have impacted the 2016 election results. While there is no question that these emails were newsworthy and in the public interest, you can hate Assange and WikiLeaks for not being partisan on behalf of the Clinton campaign. But the charges contained in the indictment that Assange faces now have nothing to do with 2016. Each and every count on the 18-count indictment, for which Assange faces 175 years in prison if he's extradited, relates to the release of the Manning leaks in 2010 and 2011. What were these leaks that were so dangerous? Let's break this down and remind ourselves what this case is about. Each of the 18 charges in the indictment relates to WikiLeaks' publication of government documents and other materials, including video footage that was evidence of war crimes committed by the U.S. government. Chelsea Manning was disgusted by what she witnessed the government doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. She thought that when the public found out what was going on, there would be outrage. The collateral murder video showed the U.S. military, from the safety of a helicopter, shooting down and killing a dozen civilians, including 2 Reuters journalists. Several more were injured, including innocent children. The collateral murder video put a face on collateral damage that we hear so much about during wartime, the ugly underbelly of war. And there is more. The Afghan war diaries shined a light on the war crimes being perpetrated in our good name. The Gitmo files disclosed the terrible abuses being wrought on prisoners held by the U.S. government in Guantanamo Bay. And it did make a difference. It made an enormous difference. Public support in the U.S. for the war began to wane. But think about it. Nobody was held accountable for the actual war crimes that were uncovered by Manning and WikiLeaks. Rather, Chelsea Manning was imprisoned and Julian Assange was pursued, indicted, and now faces a 175-year prison sentence for exposing U.S. war crimes. Over the past year or so, haven't we learned a thing or two about the importance of whistleblowers in connection with government accountability? And haven't we learned a thing or two about how badly we need to protect whistleblowers and provide a platform for them and their disclosures? WikiLeaks is primarily a distribution channel for whistleblowers, one where they can be assured that their identity and sources will be protected. It is also a resource for human rights attorneys and journalists and activists around the world to research and expose atrocities that governments are perpetrating in the name of their citizens. This fight to prevent the extradition of Julian Assange is a fight for democracy. There can be no democracy without transparency. There can be no democracy without accountability. There can be no whistleblowers without a press brave enough to publish leaked materials when they are in the public interest. By prosecuting Julian Assange, the U.S. government is literally trying to get away with murder. Where is the justice for the victims of the American war crimes? Why aren't the war criminals being prosecuted? Why are we shooting the messenger? If you care about democracy, if you care about press freedom, if you care about safety for whistleblowers, you must support Julian Assange. It doesn't matter if you think Julian Assange's actions helped Donald Trump get elected. It doesn't matter if you believe Assange was a journalist or WikiLeaks is a news publication. This case sets a dangerous precedent for journalists and publishers. Good luck, New York Times, trying to distinguish the activities of your investigative journalists from those of Julian Assange in this case. Receiving classified information about U.S. war crimes and trying to help the whistleblower cover her tracks to elude detection. Journalists solicit and receive classified information every day. It's called news gathering. Politicians deliberately leak classified information every day. If this activity is criminalized, the window into government activities is going to be closed shut. Julian Assange's right to publish is our right to know. If you value democracy, if you hate unjust wars, you must fight the extradition and prosecution of Julian Assange. Thank you.